In the last months of 2024, cocoa futures did something they had never done in the history of the contract. The price went to somewhere between $11,000 and $13,000 a metric ton. Not a spike within a range. An all-time record, several times what the market had traded at for most of the previous decade, and far beyond anything sitting in any manufacturer's cost model. Chocolate companies plan their ingredient costs a year or more out. Almost none of them had planned for that. Then it broke. By March of 2026, cocoa was back down around $3,100 a ton, though you should know the estimates disagree. Other figures for 2026 put it closer to the $5,000 to $6,000 range. Either way, still well above where the market sat historically, but a fraction of the peak. The raw material had quintupled and then collapsed inside about 18 months. Here's the part that should feel strange. Retail chocolate prices kept going up through 2026 anyway. Because during the spike, manufacturers didn't just raise prices. They shrank the bars. They swapped cocoa out for cheaper sugar and cheaper fats. They reformulated. And when the input price fell, none of that reversed. The smaller bar stayed smaller. The cheaper recipe stayed cheaper. The price stayed up. So you want to start your own chocolate brand. Let's take it apart. Chocolate looks like the perfect first product, and I understand exactly why. It's cheap per unit. It's shelf-stable, or it appears to be. Everyone on Earth eats it. You can genuinely start in a kitchen with equipment you can carry. And when you walk into a nice grocery store and see a craft bar selling for $10, $11, $12 for something that weighs about 70 grams, the margin math writes itself in your head. Ingredients can't be more than $1 or $2. The rest is profit. That's the intuition. That intuition is wrong, and it's wrong in a specific structural way that takes the whole video to unpack. So let's start with the single most important thing to understand, which is that there are two completely different businesses that both go by the name starting a chocolate brand, and almost everyone conflates them. Call them two doors. Door one is private label, sometimes called white label. You do not make chocolate. You never touch a cocoa bean. A contract manufacturer makes the chocolate to an existing recipe or a lightly tweaked one and puts your name on the wrapper. Door two is bean to bar. You buy beans, you roast them, you crack and winnow and grind and conch and temper and mold, and what comes out is a product you actually made. These sound like variations on a theme. They are not. They have different capital requirements, different timelines, different failure modes, and, most importantly, they are different businesses. One of them is a marketing company. The other is a food manufacturing company. Let's do door one first, because it's the door most people walk through. Private label is fast. Minimum order quantities typically run 500 to 5,000 units, though there are manufacturers who'll go as low as 100 or 250, and a few with no minimum at all. Pricing starts around $2 a bar at the 500-unit level. Individual filled chocolates, the little bonbons, start from about 40 cents a unit. Production runs 4 to 6 weeks, so for a few $1,000s in a month and a half, you can have a branded chocolate bar in boxes with your name on it. But that's the standard formulation timeline. A genuinely custom formulation takes 8 to 20 weeks, and it's worth understanding why, because it explains what you're actually buying. Ingredients have to be sourced. The recipe has to be developed. It goes through sensory panel testing. Somebody has to dial in a precise tempering curve for that specific formulation, because tempering is the process that gives chocolate its snap and shine, and it is unforgiving. Then packaging design, then production scheduling, and factories schedule in blocks. 5 months, comfortably, before you have a product. And here's the honest trade-off nobody says out loud. Through door one, you own a label, not a product. The manufacturer who makes your bar can make the identical bar for the next person who walks in with a purchase order. Your recipe, unless you paid for genuine exclusivity, is a line item in their catalog. You are competing entirely on packaging, story, and distribution, because the thing inside the wrapper is not defensible. Door 2 is where you own the product. It's also where the money goes. At the smallest scale, a basic bean-to-bar setup runs $5,000 to $20,000. The two biggest single capital items are a melange, which is the stone grinder that turns nibs into chocolate, at around $7,000, and a tempering machine at around $2,500. That's the kitchen scale version. Move up to a commercial turnkey system, and you're looking at $80,000 to $100,000 for roughly 50 kilos a day of output. Pushed to genuine small factory volume, 250 to 400 kilos a day, and you're at something like 100,000 euros for the line. And if you want to spec out a full production setup piece by piece, a $25,000 roaster, a $35,000 grinder and melanger, a $20,000 tempering machine, a $40,000 enrobing line, $30,000 in cooling tunnels. That's about $178,000, and you have not yet paid rent, hired anyone, bought a single bean, or printed a wrapper. Here's the failure mode. Most small chocolate businesses are undercapitalized, and the specific shape of that undercapitalization is that their total equipment and space budget comes in under $100,000, which sounds like a lot of money right up until you realize what you actually need capital for. At minimum, 2 years of rent and salaries, plus the capex, plus the build-out, plus ingredients, plus utilities, plus marketing. The people who fail don't usually fail because the chocolate was bad. They fail because they bought the melanger and ran out of runway before the brand found its customers. Now let's talk about why the bar costs $10, because this is the heart of it. Start with the beans themselves and everything that happens to them before they're chocolate. Buying the beans, roasting, cracking, winnowing off the husk, grinding, call that about $3 a pound. Then getting the beans to you in the first place. Transport and customs, another $1.50 to $3 a pound. Then the back half of the process, conching, aging, tempering, molding, maybe another $3 a pound. You're at roughly $7 to $9 a pound in cost before packaging, before labor overhead, before anything else. And here's the thing that makes craft chocolate structurally harder than mass-market chocolate. Craft chocolate inverts the ratio. A mass-market bar is mostly sugar with cocoa as a flavoring, and sugar is cheap. A craft bar is mostly cocoa with a little sugar, because that's the entire point. More cocoa, less sugar, more flavor. Which means the expensive ingredient is the one you use the most of. You cannot dilute your way to margin without ceasing to be the thing you're selling. And then the channel takes its cut, and the channel takes a lot. Specialty retailers take 30 to 50% of the retail price just to keep the bar on the shelf. Add a distributor, and that's another 15 to 18%. And retailers generally want a 40 to 60% margin, which in practice means they expect to buy from you at roughly half of the retail price. So do the arithmetic out loud. You're a small producer making something like 25 tons a year. To cover your costs and have anything left, you need somewhere around $8 to $10 a pound wholesale. Retail is roughly double wholesale. That lands the bar in the low 20s per pound at retail. And for a single craft bar, the figure that gets cited as genuinely sustainable, the price at which the maker is actually fine, is somewhere around £8.50 to £9, which reframes the whole thing. The $10 bar is not a premium markup. It's close to the floor. The people selling craft bars at $6 are usually subsidizing you out of their own capital and haven't finished discovering it yet. Now here's the detail nobody budgets for. Chocolate is not shelf-stable. It only looks shelf-stable. Ideal shipping conditions for chocolate are 64 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 to 20 Celsius, with humidity under 65%. Go above 86 Fahrenheit, 30 Celsius even briefly, and the cocoa butter softens. Let the humidity climb and the sugar crystallizes on the surface. Industry estimates put quality loss from heat exposure at 2 to 5% of all chocolate shipped. On a $200,000 container, 3% damage is a $6,000 loss, which is frequently more than temperature-controlled shipping would have cost in the first place. And a standard dry container crossing tropical latitudes doesn't just get warm. On deck, it can hit 60 to 70 degrees Celsius. What comes out the other end is fat bloom, sugar bloom, warped bars, and in the bad cases, a total write-off. Direct-to-consumer has its own version of this. Summer shipping means gel packs, humidity protection, and foam or fiber insulation at least an inch thick. A 24 to 48-hour route needs thicker insulation and more coolant than that. Anything running 48 to 72 hours or crossing a border in summer needs a validated packout with a data logger in the box so you can actually prove what temperature it saw. And at micro-batch scale, every bar that arrives broken costs 3 to 4 pounds to remake. A bloomed bar isn't discounted, it's unsellable. So the insight to hold on to is this. Chocolate behaves like a cold chain product for a large part of the year, and the costs that eat you are not the ones on your spreadsheet, they're box size. Because bigger insulated boxes get charged on dimensional weight, not actual weight, coolant strategy, and reships. All right, so who in this chain actually makes money? Let's go all the way up it. Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana together grow 65% of the world's cocoa. Farmers in those two countries earn less than 6% of the chocolate industry's total revenue, roughly 6% of the value of a bar today. That share was as high as 50% in the 1970s. It had already fallen to 16% by the 1980s. In practical terms, a Ghanaian cocoa farmer makes about $1 a day, an Ivorian farmer about 78 cents, and nearly 2 million farmers and their dependents across those two countries depend on the crop, most of them living below the poverty line. Now the other end of the same chain. Hershey posted an adjusted gross margin of 41.6% in the second quarter of 2026, up 350 basis points year over year, helped by lower commodity costs, price increases, and supply chain productivity. And in the same period, volumes actually declined. Read that carefully. Higher margin, higher prices, less chocolate sold. I'm not going to moralize about that, because the structural point is more useful than the outrage. The value in this industry does not sit with whoever grows the bean. It doesn't even sit with whoever makes the bar. It sits with whoever owns the brand and the shelf position. That is where the margin lives, and everything else in the chain is a cost center being squeezed by someone with more leverage. Which brings us back to the two doors. Door one gets you a brand fast and cheap. $2 a bar, 500 units, 6 weeks. But you're renting someone else's factory, your product is available to anyone else who asks for it, and you're competing purely on wrapper design and marketing spend against people with much bigger marketing budgets than you. Door 2 gets you something real, a product nobody else can make, and with it, 6-figure capex, a manufacturing operation, cold chain logistics for half the calendar year, retailers taking half your retail price, and a commodity input that quintupled and then crashed inside 18 months while you were trying to price a product a year in advance. So here's the whole thing in one line. In chocolate, you're not really selling chocolate. You're selling a wrapper, a shelf position, and a story. Because after the farmer takes 6% and the retailer takes half. That's the only part of the chain where the margin actually lives.